Did you know that there is a wine district in South Africa called Olifantsrivier or Elephant's River, which is really kind of the extreme Mad Max apocalyptic, very far northerly fringe of the South African winelands? It lies north of the Swartland, and if you take a look at the coloring on the map, you'll see it has a sort of brown austerity that even makes the harsh Swartland look like a veritable verdant wetland. Olifantrivier was one of the original wine of origin districts that was denominated in 1973 when the South African wine of origin scheme was first brought into use. For decades, it was synonymous with low quality, co-op driven bulk wine. And so many of the winemakers in the area who were quality conscious chose to simply use the more generic wine of origin coastal region, which, if you squint a little, almost sounds romantic and certainly has no association with low quality bulk wine. But producers like Cape Rock and Saki Mouton are slowly starting to change all that, especially with regards to work with white, less common Mediterranean cultivars. And so you will start to see wine of origin Olifantrivier, or the more specific wine of origin Koekenaap, wine of origin Vredendal, a little more often as these producers slowly start to grow confidence in the fact that this region can have a reputation for something other than low quality bulk wine. Now we're talking about Olifantrivier because today's hand drink solo wine of the day is the Cape Rock White Blend, and Cape Rock is an estate that is based in this remote wine district. To give you context on just how remote Olifantrivier is, it's all the way up the west coast, 250 kilometers north of Cape Town. That's the same distance from Châteauneuf-du-Pape down in the southern Rhone all the way up to the town of Mâcon in Burgundy. Except instead of there being cutesy little French villages along the way, there's nothing but miles and miles of semi-arid emptiness, which is really only broken by the oddly green river plain of the Olifantrivier. And even that doesn't last long, because the moment you leave the plain, it returns to the austere brownness that continues for miles and miles northward until it eventually becomes the southwestern edge of the Kalahari Desert. Now, when one ponders the really quite harsh, wild terrain in the area around Olifantrivier, and then imagine the kind of person who decides to grow vines and then make wine in that same climate, you almost by definition will be dealing with a contrarian personality. And really, those are our favorite kinds of winemakers. Cape Rock is owned by exactly such a winemaker, Gavin Brand. He's a man who is inspired by the natural end of the winemaking spectrum. And so when he plants vines, he chooses cultivars that are suited to the climate. And he's driven less by the kind of unchanging market forces that perhaps demand a Cabernet, a Chardonnay, and a Merlot forever. What he'd rather do, and in fact what inspires him more, is to make wines that consciously submit to the limitations placed upon them by the climate and terrain in a place like Olifantrivier, so that when the wines come out of the bottle and into your glass, they do in some way reflect those limitations in what you taste. Some might argue it's the limitations that make us more interesting. I've left a link to another video where I talk at length about the Cape Rock range of wine, so I'm not going to do that now because really it's time for less talking and more drinking. So when we do get into the glass and give this guy a sniff, well, we are immediately once more confronted by the joys of aging white wines. Up front there's this amazing heady, perfumey, talky mix of chalk, talc powder, spicy sandalwood, and even some dried lemon blossoms. It's hugely engaging and extroverted. There's also a little more kind of savory lanolin. And then there's fresher stuff too, like raw almonds, citrus peel, and a little bit of cut peaches. If you think this sounds like an unusual list of aromas, it's because, at least by South African standards, it's a somewhat unusual white blend. It's fronted by Grenache Blanc, just over 30%, and then just less than 30% there are equal parts of Viognier and Marsanne, and then there's a little splash of 11% Roussanne to finish it off. Now, in case that list of cultivars didn't give it all away, Gavin Brand is also a man inspired deeply, not only by the cultivars of the Southern Rhone, but perhaps also by the philosophical winemaking freedom that you find down south, where AOC rules get a lot more relaxed than they might be in a place like Burgundy. But as lovely as all that freedom and heady aromas in the wine is, when we actually give it a sip, it gets even better. So all of those elements that we discussed on the nose, pop up on the palate as well. But there's extra stuff too. The concentration is off the charts. It's really very impressive. And beyond that, it's almost chewy on the palate. And then probably some of my favorite parts of the wines, other things that you don't pick up on the nose, is that there's some crazy, juicy, bright, pristine apricot acidity. And this brightness mixed with all those other aromas is shot through with a kind of low-toned umami savoriness that really elevates the wine to a whole new level. This is a truly epic blended white, all the better for the fact that it has a couple of years under its belt already. That's all we have time for today, but if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon so that we can make more of these sorts of videos, and subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 of these each month, talking about things like wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars from all the remote corners of the South African winelands.